The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Elena and Marcus's bedroom, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floor. Elena sat on the edge of their bed, staring at yet another negative pregnancy test. The thin white stick trembled in her hands as tears gathered in her dark eyes. 7 years of marriage, 5 years of trying, and countless disappointments had worn deep grooves into her heart. "Another negative," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Marcus emerged from the bathroom, his face already showing the resignation that had become all too familiar. He sat beside his wife, wrapping his strong arms around her shoulders. At 34, he was a successful architect with calloused hands that could draft the most intricate building plans. Yet he felt utterly powerless in the face of their struggle. "I'll keep trying, my amor," he said softly, using the Spanish endearment his grandmother had taught him. "Dr. Peterson said there's still hope." Elena leaned into his embrace, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and morning coffee. "How many specialists have we seen now? 6? 7? They all say the same thing. Unexplained infertility. Everything looks normal, but nothing happens." Their modest 2-story home in the suburbs of Portland felt increasingly hollow with each passing month. They had converted the spare bedroom into a nursery 3 years ago, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and filling it with carefully chosen furniture. Now the room remained closed, a shrine to dreams deferred. The kitchen table was set for 2, as it had been every morning for years. Elena mechanically prepared their breakfast while Marcus read the newspaper, both of them moving through their routine with practiced efficiency. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. They had learned to communicate in glances and gentle touches, but it carried the weight of unspoken longing. "Mrs. Rodriguez called yesterday," Elena said, cracking eggs into a bowl. "Her daughter just had twins." Marcus looked up from his paper, studying his profile. Elena's black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. She was still beautiful at 32, though he noticed the worry lines that hadn't been there when they first met at the university library 9 years ago. "That's wonderful for them," he replied carefully. "She asked if we wanted the extra crib they bought." Elena's voice caught slightly. "I told her to think about it." The weight of their neighbors' well-meaning gestures had become almost unbearable. Baby showers they couldn't attend without breaking down, family gatherings where relatives asked increasingly awkward questions about their plans for children, the careful way people spoke around them as if infertility were contagious. Marcus reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "What if we looked into adoption again? We've been on the waiting list for 3 years, Marcus. 3 years, and they keep telling us the same thing. We're not high priority because we're still young enough to conceive naturally." Elena's frustration bubbled over. "But what if we can? What if this is just how our story ends?" The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, grateful for the distraction. On their porch stood Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor from across the street. The 78-year-old woman was something of a neighborhood institution, known for her elaborate garden and her uncanny ability to appear whenever someone needed help. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Chen said, her accent still thick despite 5 decades in America. "I brought you some of my chrysanthemum tea. It is good for constitution." Elena accepted the small paper bag with a weak smile. Mrs. Chen had been bringing her various herbal remedies for months, each one promising to boost fertility or balance hormones. While Elena appreciated the gesture, she had little faith left in folk remedies. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That is very kind." The older woman studied Elena's face with sharp, knowing eyes. "You look tired, child. This trying for baby. It's wearing on you." We're managing," Elena replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Chen stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. In my village in Taiwan, when the doctors cannot help, people go to see the wise woman. She knows things that modern medicine does not." Elena felt a familiar stab of frustration. Another well-meaning suggestion, another false hope dangled before her. "Mrs. Chen, we've tried everything. Acupuncture, meditation, dietary changes, fertility drugs. Not everything," the older woman interrupted gently. "There are older ways, deeper ways. My cousin's daughter, she struggled for 8 years. 8 years, the doctor said impossible. But the wise woman, she helped. Now she has 3 beautiful children. Despite herself, Elena felt a flicker of interest. A wise woman? Mrs. Chen nodded vigorously. In the mountains, 2 hours north of the city. She is, how do you say, gifted. She sees things others cannot see. But she is not like the charlatans who take money and give false promises. This woman, she only helps when she can truly help. Elena looked back toward the kitchen where Marcus was finishing his breakfast, preparing for another day at the architectural firm where he was a junior partner. Every morning he left with optimism, and every evening he returned to find her staring at baby websites or crying over pregnancy announcements on social media. I thought, Mrs. Chen, we've spent so much money already, and Marcus is starting to talk about accepting that children might not be in our future. The older woman reached out and grasped Elena's hands with surprising strength. Child, I see how this pain is eating at you both. It is in your eyes, in the way you walk, in the sadness that follows you like a shadow. What harm could it do to try one more thing? If it doesn't work, at least you tried everything. That evening, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on anything. She attempted to grade the English papers from her high school students, but her mind kept wandering to Mrs. Chen's words. A wise woman in the mountains who could see things others couldn't. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, yet the desperation in her heart made even fairy tales seem worth pursuing. Marcus found her sitting in their living room, staring at the fireplace where they hung their wedding photo. In the picture, they were both laughing, her in a simple white dress and him in a navy suit, surrounded by friends and family. They looked so young, so certain that their future would unfold exactly as they planned. Rough day? He asked, settling beside her on the couch. Mrs. Chen came by this morning. She told me about some woman in the mountains who helps couples who can to have children. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What kind of woman? Elena hesitated, knowing how it would sound. She called her a wise woman. Said she has gifts that doctors don't have. Elena, Marcus, his voice carried a note of gentle warning. I know how it sounds. But Marcus, what if there is something we haven't tried? What if conventional medicine, ISN, is the only answer? Marcus studied his wife, his face, seeing the desperate hope flickering in her eyes. They had explored every medical option, spent thousands of dollars on treatments and consultations, endured invasive procedures and emotional roller coasters. Each failure had chipped away at Elena's spirit until she seemed like a ghost of the vibrant woman he married. Tell me more about this woman, he said finally. Elena, his eyes brightened slightly. Mrs. Chen said her name is Esperanza. She lives in a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, about 2 hours from here. Her cousin, his daughter, couldn't have children for 8 years, and this woman helped her. Now she has 3 kids. And what exactly does she do? I don't know. Mrs. Chen was vague about the details. She just said that Esperanza sees things others can't see, and she only helps when she can truly help. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. His rational mind rebelled against the idea of consulting some mountain mystic, but his heart ached for his wife's pain. He had watched Elena transform from the confident, joyful woman he'd fallen in love with into someone haunted by unfulfilled longing. It could be a scam, he said gently. There are people who prey on desperate couples. Mrs. Chen said she doesn't charge money up front. Only asks for payment if she can actually help. And if she can help, Elena's shoulders sagged. Then we truly exhausted every option. Maybe then I can find peace with the idea of a life without children. The next morning, Elena called in sick to work and drove to Mrs. Chen's house. The older woman was in her garden, tending to the late-blooming roses that somehow flourished despite the approaching winter. I want to know more about this Esperanza, Elena said without preamble. Mrs. Chen smiled as if she'd been expecting this visit. I will give you directions, but you must understand, child, she is not like the doctors you are used to. Her ways are old, her methods unusual. You must go with an open heart and an open mind. What exactly does she do? She reads the threads of fate that bind us all. She sees the obstacles that prevent life from taking root. Sometimes these obstacles are in the body, sometimes in the spirit, sometimes in the connections between souls. Mrs. Chen's voice took on a mystical quality. She helped my cousin's daughter because she could see that the young woman's grandmother's spirit was blocking the pregnancy, angry about an old family feud. Once the grandmother was properly honored and the feud was resolved, the babies came. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. That sounds impossible. Strange. Yes, to Western minds it does. But in my culture, we understand that the world has layers. What you see is not all there is. That evening, Elena presented Marcus with handwritten directions to a cabin in the Cascade Mountains. The route was complex, involving several turns onto unmarked forest roads and landmarks like the lightning-struck oak and the stone that looks like a sleeping bear. Mrs. Chen says we should bring an offering, Elena said, her voice uncertain. Something that represents our desire for a child. Marcus looked at the paper, noting the sketched map and cryptic instructions. Every logical part of his mind screamed that this was foolishness, yet he couldn't bear to extinguish the first spark of hope he'd seen in Elena's eyes for months. What kind of offering? She suggested something handmade, something that required effort and attention, like a blanket we knitted ourselves, or a wooden toy Marcus could carve. That weekend, they drove to the craft store and bought yarn and knitting needles for Elena, and a block of cherry wood and carving tools for Marcus. They worked in companionable silence in their living room, Elena learning to knit from YouTube videos while Marcus shaped the wood into a simple rattle. As they worked, they talked more openly than they had in months. Elena shared her fears that she was somehow defective, that her body was betraying her dreams. Marcus confessed his own guilt, wondering if his history of diabetes or his occasional drinking in college had somehow compromised his fertility. Maybe this Esperanza will take one look at us and tell us we're beyond help, Elena said, dropping a stitch in her knitting and having to start the row over. Maybe, Marcus agreed, sanding the his handle smooth. But maybe she'll see something the doctors missed. Maybe she'll give us a different perspective. The baby blanket Elena was attempting was supposed to be yellow with white trim, but her inexperienced hands produced something more like a lumpy, misshapen rectangle. Marcus' rattle was simple but solid, with a handle that fit comfortably in an adult's palm and a hollow chamber that would hold small beads to create the sound. 3 weeks later, they had completed their offerings. The blanket was far from perfect, full of dropped stitches and uneven rows, but Elena had poured her heart into every stitch. The rattle was smooth and beautiful, carved with care and hope. When do we go? Marcus asked, holding the directions Mrs. Chen had provided. Elena looked at the calendar on their kitchen wall, noting the red X that marked the days of her cycle. Next weekend, Mrs. Chen said it's best to go when I'm not ovulating, when my body is in its resting phase. The night before their journey, neither of them slept well. Elena tossed and turned, alternating between excitement and terror. What if this woman was a fraud? What if she confirmed their worst fears? What if she offered them false hope that would make their eventual acceptance of childlessness even more painful? Marcus lay awake listening to his wife, his restless breathing, his own mind churning with similar thoughts. He had always been a man of logic and science, but love had a way of making even the most rational person consider impossible things. As dawn broke over their quiet neighborhood, they prepared for what felt less like a day trip and more like a pilgrimage. Elena packed their offerings carefully in a cloth bag, along with sandwiches and water for the journey. Marcus checked the directions one more time and loaded their Toyota with emergency supplies in case they got lost in the mountain wilderness. Standing in their driveway, Elena looked back at their house with its closed nursery window and empty swing set that had been a housewarming gift from Marcus' parents. Whatever happened in the mountains, whatever this Esperanza told them, their lives would never be quite the same. Ready? Marcus asked, his hand on the car door handle. Elena took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air and nodded. Ready. The Toyota climbed steadily into the Cascade Mountains as morning mist clung to the evergreen forests. Elena clutched Mrs. Chen's hand-drawn map, her finger tracing their route through increasingly remote roads. They had left the main highway an hour ago, and civilization seemed to fade with each passing mile. Turn left at the mailbox shaped like a fish, Elena read aloud, squinting at Mrs. Chen's spidery handwriting. Marcus slowed the car, scanning the roadside until he spotted a weathered wooden mailbox carved in the shape of a salmon. The dirt road beyond it was barely wide enough for their car, flanked by towering Douglas firs that blocked most of the sunlight. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked as the car bounced over ruts and fallen branches. Elena's stomach churned with a mixture of car sickness and anxiety. Mrs. Chen was very specific about the directions, She said Esperanza doesn't to advertise her location. People have to really want to find her. The road wound deeper into the wilderness, crossing several small streams on rickety wooden bridges that creaked ominously under their weight. Elena's cell phone had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and the GPS had given up entirely. They were truly on their own now, following nothing but faith and the cryptic landmarks on Mrs. Chen's map. After another mile of bone-jarring driving, they reached a fork in the road marked by the promised lightning-struck oak, a massive tree split down the middle by some long-ago storm, its two halves leaning away from each other like a wishbone. "Right fork," Elena said, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. The right fork led them up a steep incline that tested their car's aging transmission. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter as loose gravel scattered beneath their tires. Through the windshield, they caught glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance, reminders of how high they had climbed. There, Elena pointed ahead to a large boulder beside the road. The stone that looks like a sleeping bear. Indeed, the weathered granite formation resembled a bear curled up for hibernation, its rounded back and tucked head clearly visible from their approach angle. According to the map, they were close now. The final stretch of road was little more than a hiking trail, forcing Marcus to drive at walking speed to avoid scraping the car's undercarriage on protruding rocks. Ancient trees pressed close on both sides, their branches intertwining overhead to create a tunnel of green shadows. Then, quite suddenly, the forest opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a log cabin that seemed to grow from the earth itself. Moss covered much of its roof, and wildflowers bloomed in profusion around its foundation. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and vegetables grew in neat rows in a garden bordered by hand-carved wooden posts. "This is it," Elena whispered, her heart pounding. They sat in the car for a moment, taking in the scene. The cabin looked like something from a storybook, both inviting and mysterious. Wind chimes made from driftwood and shells hung from the covered porch, creating soft music in the mountain breeze. A few chickens pecked at the ground near a small coop, and a gray cat sunned itself on the front steps. "Should we knock?" Marcus asked. Before Elena could answer, the cabin's front door opened. A woman emerged, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. This was not what she had expected. Esperanza appeared to be in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair braided down her back and skin weathered by mountain sun and wind. She wore a simple brown dress and a colorful shawl, but what struck Elena most were her eyes, dark and deep, seeming to hold depths of knowledge and compassion. The woman approached their car with unhurried steps, as if she had been expecting them. When she reached the driver's side window, Marcus rolled it down. "You must be Elena and Marcus," Esperanza said, her voice carrying a slight accent Elena couldn't place. "Mrs. Chen sent word that you might come." Elena felt a shiver of surprise. "She told you we were coming?" Esperanza smiled, and her entire face transformed with warmth. "In a way. Please, bring your offerings and come inside. We have much to discuss." They gathered their cloth bag and followed Esperanza toward the cabin. The porch boards were smooth and solid under their feet, worn by decades of use but obviously well maintained. Bundles of herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with scents Elena couldn't identify. Some sweet, some sharp, all somehow soothing. The interior of the cabin surprised them with its comfort and functionality. Handmade furniture filled the space, a large wooden table, chairs with woven seats, shelves lined with books and jars of various substances. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and copper pots hung from hooks above a wood-burning stove. "Please, sit." Esperanza gestured to the chairs around the table. "Would you like some tea? The journey up the mountain can be taxing." As their hostess busied herself with preparing tea, Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. This felt nothing like what they had imagined. There were no crystal balls or mysterious symbols, no incense or candles. The cabin was simply the home of someone who lived close to the earth, practical and peaceful. Esperanza set ceramic mugs before them, steam rising from what smelled like chamomile and mint. She settled into her own chair, studying them with those penetrating eyes. "Tell me about your struggle," she said simply. Elena had rehearsed this story so many times for so many doctors that the words came automatically. The years of trying, the medical tests, the treatments, the mounting desperation. But as she spoke, she found herself sharing details she had never told the specialists. Her dreams about the children she couldn't to have, her fear that she was being punished for some unknown transgression, the way she felt like a failure as a woman. Marcus added his own perspective, his worry for Elena, his mental health, his own guilt and inadequacy, his willingness to consider adoption, but Elena, his resistance to giving up on pregnancy. Throughout their recitation, Esperanza listened without interruption, her hands wrapped around her mug, her expression compassionate but unreadable. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Show me what you brought," she said finally. Elena unpacked their offerings with trembling hands. The misshapen baby blanket looked even more pathetic in this rustic setting, and Marcus, this wooden rattle seemed crude compared to the fine craftsmanship evident in Esperanza's furniture. But the woman, his eyes lit up as she examined their work. She ran her fingers over Elena's uneven stitches and lifted the rattle to test its weight and balance. "These are beautiful," she said, and Elena could tell she meant it. "You put your hearts into them, your hopes and dreams. That is what makes them powerful." "Powerful?" Marcus asked, his skepticism evident. Esperanza set the rattle down gently. "Everything in this world carries energy. Our intentions, our emotions, our deepest desires. When you made these with love and hope for your future child, you imbued them with that energy. They are not just objects anymore. They are prayers made manifest." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. No doctor had ever spoken to her about prayers or energy or the power of hope. They had discussed hormone levels and ovulation cycles and statistical probabilities, but never the spiritual weight of longing. "Can you help us?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Esperanza stood and moved to one of her shelves, selecting a small cloth pouch. "First, I need to understand what forces are at work in your situation." "May I see your hands?" They extended their hands across the table. Esperanza took Elena's hands first, turning them palm up and studying the lines with intense concentration. Her touch was warm and surprisingly gentle, her fingers tracing patterns Elena couldn't interpret. After several minutes, she released Elena's hands and took Marcus. Again, the careful examination, the thoughtful silence. "Interesting," she murmured finally. "What do you see?" Elena asked anxiously. "Your bodies are healthy, both of you." The medical doctors were correct about that. The blockage is not physical. Esperanza returned to her seat. "But there is something else, something deeper. A shadow that follows your family line, Elena." Elena's blood ran cold. "What kind of shadow? Tell me about your grandmother on your mother's side." The question caught Elena off guard. "Abuela Rosa. She died when I was 12. She was a difficult woman. Very traditional, very religious. She never approved of my mother marrying my father because he was an anti-Mexican." "And how did she die?" "Cancer. But she fought it for years. She was angry about it. Angry at God, angry at the world. She said God was punishing our family for my mother, his choices." Esperanza nodded slowly. The dying sometimes carry their anger with them into the next realm. And that anger can affect the living, especially when it concerns family bloodlines and cultural traditions. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Are you saying Elena's dead grandmother is preventing us from having children?" "Not preventing, exactly, but her unresolved anger creates a disturbance in the spiritual plane that affects fertility. The soul of a potential child senses this disturbance and may choose not to incarnate into such troubled energy." Elena felt dizzy. That is impossible, is it?" Esperanza asked gently. You've tried everything medicine can offer. Your bodies work perfectly, yet no child comes. Sometimes the answer lies beyond the physical realm." She rose again and moved to a cabinet, returning with a leather-bound journal and several small glass vials. "I can help you, but the work will not be easy. And it will require you to open your hearts to possibilities you may find difficult to accept." "What kind of work?" Marcus asked. "First, we must address the spiritual disturbance. Elena, you will need to make peace with your grandmother, as spirit, to understand her pain and help her release her anger. This may require you to visit places from her past, to perform rituals of forgiveness and healing." Elena's mind reeled. "How do I make peace with someone who has been dead for 20 years? "The same way you would make peace with someone living, with understanding, compassion, and genuine forgiveness. Death does not end relationships. It only changes their form." Esperanza began mixing substances from her vials into a small ceramic bowl. "Second, you must both undergo a cleansing process to clear the negative energy that has accumulated around your desire for children. Desperation and fear create their own blockages. And third, Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he almost didn't want to know. Third, you must plant seeds of new beginning, literally and figuratively. You will create a garden together, tend it with the same care you would give a child. As the plants grow and thrive under your nurturing, so too will your fertility be restored. She handed Elena the ceramic bowl, which now contained a thick, dark paste that smelled of earth and herbs. Rub this on your abdomen each night before sleep, and Marcus, you must rub it on your lower back. Do this for one full moon cycle while you work on the spiritual healing. Elena stared at the bowl in her hands. Everything Esperanza was saying challenged her rational, modern worldview. Yet sitting in this cabin, surrounded by the wisdom of the mountains and the gentle authority of this woman, it didn't seem impossible anymore. How do we begin? She asked. Esperanza smiled. You begin by trusting. Trust in the process, trust in each other, and trust in the possibility that the universe wants to give you what you desire most. She walked to a window and gazed out at the surrounding forest. There is one more thing you should know. The child who comes to you, when he comes, will be special. He will carry within him the healing that your family line has needed for generations. Your struggle to bring him into the world is part of his greater purpose. He, Elena, is heart-skipped. You see a son. I see a soul waiting to be born, a soul who chose you as parents long before you were even married. He waits now for the path to be cleared, for the old wounds to be healed. Your love for him already exists across time and space. You need only remove the obstacles that prevent his arrival. As the afternoon wore on, Esperanza provided them with detailed instructions for their spiritual work. Elena would need to visit her grandmother's grave, then travel to the small Mexican village where Rosa had been born. She would need to speak with elderly relatives, learn about her grandmother's early life and the traumas that had shaped her anger. Marcus would support this journey while also preparing their physical space for new life. They would plant a garden together, choosing plants that symbolized fertility and new beginnings. They would renovate the closed nursery, not with hope this time, but with certainty. The most important thing, Esperanza emphasized as they prepared to leave, is that you approach this work with joy, not desperation. A child is a gift, not a prize to be won through suffering. Release your grip on the outcome and simply do the work with love. As they packed their car for the journey home, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope mixed with peace. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had driven her to countless medical appointments, but a deeper knowing that they were finally on the right path. Do you believe her? Marcus asked as they navigated back down the mountain roads. Elena considered the question. 6 hours ago, she would have scoffed at talk of angry spirits and energy disturbances. But something had shifted during their time in the cabin. She felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. I believe she sees something the doctors don't, Elena said finally. And I believe she genuinely wants to help us. The drive home passed in comfortable contemplation. They stopped for dinner at a small-town diner, where they spread Esperanza's notes across the table and began planning their next steps. The elderly waitress, noticing their serious discussion, refilled their coffee cups and mentioned that her own daughter had struggled with infertility for years before finally conceiving twins. Sometimes, the waitress said with a knowing smile, you have to try a different kind of medicine. By the time they reached their own driveway, the sun was setting behind the suburban rooftops. Their house looked exactly the same, but Elena felt as if they were seeing it with new eyes. Tomorrow, they would begin the work Esperanza had outlined. They would tend their marriage like a garden, heal the wounds of the past, and prepare their hearts and home for the child who was waiting to be born. That night, Elena applied the herbal paste to her abdomen while Marcus did the same to his lower back. The substance was warm against their skin and smelled of sage and earth. As they lay in bed together, Elena felt a stirring of something she had almost forgotten. Excitement about the future. Whatever happens, she whispered to Marcus in the darkness. I'm glad we went. Me too, he replied, pulling her closer. Me too. 2 weeks after their visit to Esperanza, Elena stood at her grandmother's grave in Mount Calvary Cemetery, clutching a bouquet of marigolds, Rosa's favorite flowers. The November air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet as she approached the weathered headstone. Rosa Esperanza Morales, she read aloud, surprised to notice for the first time that her grandmother shared a name with the mountain woman. Beloved mother and grandmother, 1932 to 1998. Elena knelt beside the grave, arranging the bright orange flowers in the metal vase. She had visited this cemetery countless times over the years, but never with the intention of actually communicating with the dead. The concept still felt foreign to her rational mind, yet Esperanza's words echoed in her memory. Death does not end relationships. It only changes their form. Abuela Rosa, she began hesitantly, feeling foolish talking to a headstone. I need to understand what happened to you. Why were you so angry? What did our family do that made you feel we deserved punishment? The wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak tree overhead, but no other response came. Elena sat back on her heels, remembering her grandmother, his fierce eyes and stern voice. Rosa had been a formidable woman, quick to anger and slow to forgive, carrying herself with a pride that bordered on arrogance. Over the past 2 weeks, Elena had been following Esperanza's instructions, applying the herbal paste nightly and beginning research into her family history. She had called her mother in Arizona, asking questions about Rosa's past that her mother found strange but was willing to answer. She was different after she came to America, Elena's mother had said during one of their phone conversations. Harder, more bitter. In Mexico, she had been respected, almost revered in her village. Here, she was just another immigrant cleaning houses for wealthy white families. Elena had also spoken with her elderly Aunt Carmen, Rosa's youngest daughter, who still lived in San Diego. Carmen had shared memories that painted a more complex picture of Rosa's life. Your grandmother lost 3 babies before your mother was born, Carmen had revealed. This was in Mexico, before they came north. The doctors there said it was God's will, but Rosa blamed herself. She made a vow to the Virgin of Guadalupe that if she could have one healthy child, she would dedicate her life to serving God and preserving our traditions. This information had stunned Elena. Her grandmother, the woman who had seemed so cold and judgmental, had once struggled with the same heartbreak that now consumed Elena's life. As Elena knelt at the grave, this knowledge transformed her understanding of Rosa's anger. The harsh words about God punishing the family, the disapproval of Elena's mother marrying outside their culture. It all stemmed from a desperate woman's attempt to control fate through rigid adherence to tradition. You were scared, Elena whispered to the headstone. You thought if our family strayed from the old ways, we would be punished like you were punished with those lost babies. A sudden gust of wind scattered some of the marigold petals, and Elena felt an odd sensation, as if someone was standing just behind her. She turned, but saw only empty cemetery paths and distant trees. That afternoon, Elena drove to her local library and spent hours researching genealogy records and immigration documents. She discovered that Rosa had been born in a tiny village called Santa Elena in the mountains of Michoacán, Mexico. The village was so small it barely appeared on modern maps, but Elena found references to it in historical documents about indigenous communities that had maintained ancient traditions even after Spanish colonization. The more Elena learned, the more she understood that Rosa's spiritual beliefs ran much deeper than simple Catholicism. Her grandmother had grown up in a community where the line between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin, where the dead were believed to maintain active relationships with the living. Following Esperanza's instructions, Elena began preparing for a journey to Mexico to visit Santa Elena. Marcus initially balked at the idea of international travel based on what he still considered superstition, but he couldn't deny the positive changes he was seeing in his wife. For the first time in years, Elena seemed hopeful rather than desperate. She had resumed activities she had abandoned during their fertility struggles, cooking elaborate meals, tending to their small herb garden, even laughing at his jokes. The constant tension that had characterized their relationship for so long was gradually easing. If this is what it takes to help you heal, Marcus said one evening as they planned the trip, then I'm all for it. They booked flights to Mexico City, then arranged for a rental car to drive to Michoacán. Elena's Aunt Carmen had provided them with contact information for distant relatives who still lived in the region, though she warned that Santa Elena had been largely abandoned in recent decades as young people moved to larger cities for work. The night before their departure, Elena sat in their renovated nursery, now painted a soft green and filled with plants they had started from seeds. Following Esperanza's guidance, they had transformed the room from a shrine to disappointment into a living space celebrating growth and possibility. Their journey to Mexico began before dawn. As their plane lifted off from Portland International Airport, Elena pressed her face to the window and watched her familiar world shrink below. She carried with her a small bag containing items Esperanza had specified. Soil from Rosa's grave, a photograph of her grandmother as a young woman, and the wooden rattle Marcus had carved. The flight to Mexico City passed uneventfully, but Elena felt increasingly nervous as they descended into the sprawling capital. This was only her third time in Mexico, and her previous visits had been to resort areas with her parents when she was a child. The idea of traveling to a remote mountain village in search of spiritual healing felt overwhelming. Their rental car was a small, sturdy vehicle suitable for mountain roads. Marcus, who had studied Spanish in college, handled most of the communication as they navigated out of the city and toward the state of Michoacán. The landscape gradually changed from urban sprawl to agricultural fields to rolling hills dotted with small towns. They spent their first night in Morelia, the state capital, in a colonial hotel with thick walls and courtyards filled with flowering bougainvillea. Elena barely slept, her mind churning with questions about what they might find in Santa Elena. The next morning, they continued their journey into the mountains. The roads became increasingly narrow and winding as they climbed through pine forests and past small settlements where children waved from doorways and women sold fruit from roadside stands. Elena's distant cousin, Maria Dolores, had agreed to meet them in the town of Tallulah, the last place accessible by car before the final climb to Santa Elena. Maria was a woman in her 70s with silver hair braided like Esperanza's and hands weathered by decades of farm work. "You have Rosa's eyes," Maria said in Spanish when she first saw Elena. "But softer. Rosa's eyes always held too much pain." They transferred to Maria's ancient pickup truck for the final ascent to Santa Elena. The road was barely more than a goat path, switchbacking up steep slopes through forests that seemed untouched by modernity. Elena gripped the door handle as they bounced over rocks and navigated hairpin turns with heart-stopping drops on one side. "Rosa left here when she was 18, Maria explained as they drove. "She was supposed to marry the son of a neighboring family, but she fell in love with your grandfather instead. He was from the city, a teacher who came to our village for a year to work with the children." Elena absorbed this information, another piece of her grandmother's puzzle falling into place. Rosa had been forced to choose between tradition and love, and that choice had apparently haunted her for the rest of her life. Santa Elena, when they finally reached it, was heartbreakingly beautiful and almost completely deserted. The village consisted of perhaps 20 stone houses arranged around a small plaza dominated by an ancient church. Most of the buildings were empty, their doors standing open to reveal rooms where wildflowers now grew through cracked tile floors. "Only 5 families remain," Maria said as she parked near the church. "The young people all leave for Mexico City or cross the border to El Norte. Soon, Santa Elena will exist only in memory." Maria led them to one of the few occupied houses, where an ancient woman named Esperanza Luz sat weaving on a backstrap loom in her courtyard. Elena's heart skipped when she heard the name Esperanza, wondering if this was more than coincidence. "She is our curandera," Maria explained. "Our healer. She knew your grandmother when they were girls." Esperanza Luz looked up from her weaving with eyes clouded by cataracts but somehow still penetrating. She studied Elena's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Rosa, his granddaughter," she said in heavily accented English. "You have come about the babies." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "How did you know?" "The same reason Rosa's spirit has been restless these many years. The wound that was never healed, the curse that was never lifted." The old woman set aside her weaving and gestured for them to sit on wooden stools arranged around a small fire pit. As the afternoon wore on, Esperanza Luz told them a story that transformed Elena's understanding of her family's history. When Rosa was 16, she had become pregnant by her teacher's sweetheart. In the conservative village culture of the 1940s, this was scandalous, and Rosa's family had forced her to undergo a traditional abortion using herbs and rituals. "The baby's spirit was angry," Esperanza Luz explained. "It had chosen Rosa as its mother, and when it was prevented from being born, it placed a shadow on her womb. She lost 3 more babies after that, and the guilt consumed her." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "But she did have my mother eventually." "Yes, because she made a pact with the spirits. She promised that her daughter would marry within our traditions, would raise her children in the old ways. When your mother married an outsider and you grew up speaking English instead of Spanish, attending American schools instead of learning our customs, Rosa's guilt and fear returned. The old curandera stood and disappeared into her house, returning with a cloth bundle that she unwrapped to reveal various herbs, stones, and other ritual objects. Rosa, a spirit, has been trying to protect the family line the only way she knew how, Esperanza Luz continued, by preventing another generation from being born into what she saw as spiritual danger. But her protection has become a prison for all of you. Marcus, who had been listening with growing skepticism, finally spoke up. Are you saying that Elena's dead grandmother is preventing us from having children because she disapproves of our lifestyle? Not disapproves, the curandera corrected gently. Fears. Rosa fears that children born outside the protection of traditional ways will suffer as she suffered. She holds them back from incarnation because she believes she is saving them from pain. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. How do we convince her that she is wrong? How do we show her that love transcends cultural boundaries? You must perform the ritual of forgiveness and release. You must acknowledge Rosa's pain, honor her intentions, and then lovingly set her free from the burden of protecting future generations. The ritual Esperanza Luz described was complex, involving offerings to the four directions, prayers in both Spanish and English, and a symbolic burial of objects representing the family's pain. Elena would need to speak directly to Rosa's spirit, acknowledging the grandmother's losses while also asserting her own right to build a family according to her own values. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, they gathered in the ruins of the village's original church. The roof had partially collapsed decades ago, but the stone walls still stood, and wildflowers grew where the altar had once been. Elena knelt in the center of the church, surrounded by candles and offerings, the soil from Rosa's grave, photographs of family members both living and dead, and the wooden rattle Marcus had carved with such hope. Following Esperanza Luz's guidance, Elena began to speak to her grandmother's spirit in a mixture of English and her imperfect Spanish. She acknowledged Rosa's suffering, praised her strength in raising a family in a foreign country, and expressed understanding for the fear that had driven her protective instincts. But Abuela, Elena said, her voice growing stronger, love is not limited by borders or languages. The child who wants to come to us will be blessed by both cultures, enriched by diversity, not endangered by it. You can release your vigil now. You can trust us to raise our children with both wisdom and love. As Elena spoke, she felt a profound shift in the atmosphere around them. The evening wind died completely, and the mountain became utterly still. Then, just as suddenly, a warm breeze arose, carrying the scent of roses and marigolds. The candles flickered but didn't go out. Instead, their flames seemed to dance in recognition of some unseen presence. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation of being embraced by invisible arms. She is here, Esperanza Luz whispered. Rosa comes to hear your words. Elena continued speaking, pouring out years of frustration and longing, but also offering forgiveness for the pain her grandmother had unknowingly caused. She promised to honor Rosa's memory while living according to her own truth, to teach her future children about their Mexican heritage while also embracing the multicultural world they would inherit. Finally, following the curandera's instructions, Elena buried the wooden rattle in the church floor, symbolically planting the seed of new life in sacred ground blessed by generations of prayers. As she covered the small hole with earth from Rosa's grave, Elena felt a profound release, as if chains she hadn't known she was wearing had suddenly fallen away. The oppressive weight that had shadowed her desire for children lifted, replaced by a lightness that made her feel almost dizzy. When the ritual was complete, they sat in comfortable silence as stars appeared overhead through the broken roof. Elena leaned against Marcus, feeling more at peace than she had in years. It's done, Esperanza Luz said simply. Rosa's spirit is free to continue its journey, and your path to parenthood is clear. They spent one more night in Santa Elena, sleeping in Maria's simple guest room and waking to the sound of roosters and church bells from neighboring villages. Over breakfast of fresh tortillas and eggs from Maria's chickens, Elena felt a strange tingling in her abdomen, not unlike the sensation she had experienced during ovulation, but different somehow, deeper. The journey back to Mexico City passed in contemplative silence. Elena found herself touching her belly repeatedly, though she told herself it was too soon for any physical signs of pregnancy. They wouldn't even attempt to conceive for another week, according to her cycle. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The desperate edge that had characterized her desire for children was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that bordered on certainty. She no longer felt like she was fighting against fate. Instead, she felt aligned with it. On the plane home, Marcus took her hand as they flew over the lights of American cities. "How do you feel?" he asked. Elena considered the question. "Complete," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel complete." They landed in Portland at midnight, exhausted but somehow renewed. As they drove through their quiet neighborhood toward home, Elena noticed things she had overlooked before. Children, bicycles in driveways, playground equipment silhouetted against streetlights, the warm glow of family homes where parents were perhaps tucking children into bed. Instead of the familiar stab of envy, these sights filled her with anticipation. Soon, she thought with calm certainty, very soon, their house welcomed them with the familiar sense of the herbs they had been growing. Elena went immediately to check on their plants, finding them thriving despite their week-long absence. Mrs. Chen had faithfully watered them according to their instructions, and several had produced new growth in their absence. As they prepared for bed, Elena applied Esperanza, this herbal paste, one more time, though somehow she knew this would be the last time she would need it. The mountain curandera had been right. The spiritual work was complete. Now they simply needed to trust in the natural processes of life and love. That night, Elena dreamed of a small boy with Marcus, his dark hair and her own brown eyes, laughing as he ran through a garden where roses and marigolds bloomed side by side. In the dream, an elderly woman who looked like Rosa but with a peaceful expression watched from the shadows. No longer a guardian preventing life, but an ancestor blessing new beginnings. When Elena woke, she knew with absolute certainty that their long wait was almost over. 3 weeks after their return from Mexico, Elena stood in her bathroom holding a pregnancy test with trembling hands. This time, however, her trembling came not from fear but from overwhelming joy. 2 pink lines blazed clearly on the small white strip. Positive, unmistakably positive. "Marcus," she called, her voice cracking with emotion. He appeared in the doorway, toothbrush still in his mouth, and froze when he saw her expression. Elena held up the test, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Marcus spit into the sink and rushed to her side, taking the test with shaking hands. They stared at it together in stunned silence, as if afraid the lines might disappear if they looked away. "Is this real?" Marcus whispered. Elena nodded, laughing and crying simultaneously. It's real. We're going to have a baby." They held each other in their small bathroom, swaying slightly as the magnitude of the moment washed over them. After 7 years of marriage, 5 years of trying, and countless disappointments, they were finally, truly pregnant. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and cautious celebration. Elena called her doctor to schedule a blood test to confirm the pregnancy, though she felt certain in her bones that this was different from the false alarms of the past. Her body felt different, not just the missed period, but a deeper sense of fullness, of life taking root. They drove to Mrs. Chen's house to share the news with the woman whose wisdom had started them on this journey. The elderly woman opened her door, took one look at their faces, and clapped her hands together in delight. "I knew it!" she exclaimed. "I knew the mountain woman would help you. Come, we must celebrate with tea." As they sat in Mrs. Chen's living room, surrounded by her collection of plants and family photographs, Elena found herself touching her abdomen protectively. The gesture came naturally, instinctively, as if her body already knew its new purpose. "When will you tell Esperanza?" Mrs. Chen asked. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. They had been wondering the same thing. Their mountain guide had given them no way to contact her directly. No phone number, no address beyond the cryptic directions through the forest. "We'll have to drive up to see her," Marcus said. She should know that her help worked. 2 days later, the blood test confirmed what Elena already knew. Her pregnancy hormone levels were strong and healthy, indicating a viable, developing pregnancy. Dr. Peterson, who had been treating Elena for 3 years, was amazed. "Honestly, I'm not sure what has changed," the doctor admitted during their appointment. "Your test results from 6 months ago showed the same unexplained infertility we've been dealing with all along. But sometimes these things just resolve themselves. Bodies are mysterious." Elena and Marcus chose not to mention their unconventional treatment. They suspected Dr. Peterson would be skeptical of spiritual healing and ancestral curses, and they didn't to want to diminish their joy with medical skepticism. Instead, they focused on the future. Elena began taking prenatal vitamins and adjusted her diet according to the doctor's recommendations. Marcus baby-proofed their house and researched cribs and car seats with the same methodical attention he brought to architectural projects. But first, they needed to make the pilgrimage back to Esperanza, his mountain cabin. The October weather was crisp as they once again navigated the winding forest roads leading to Esperanza's clearing. The journey that had seemed so uncertain and desperate 3 months earlier now felt like a joyful homecoming. They found Esperanza in her garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the first frost. She looked up as their car approached, and a knowing smile spread across her weathered face. "The child has come," she said before they even got out of the car. Elena laughed, no longer surprised by Esperanza's intuitive knowledge. "3 weeks ago, we wanted to thank you." Esperanza set down her basket of vegetables and embraced Elena warmly. "The thanks belong to you and your grandmother's spirit. You did the work of healing. I merely showed you the path." They went inside the familiar cabin, where Esperanza prepared her special tea, and they shared the story of their journey to Mexico. The mountain woman listened with deep attention, nodding as Elena described the ritual in the ruined church and the profound sense of release she had experienced afterward. "Your grandmother Rosa chose her name well," Esperanza observed. "Rosa means rebirth, new beginnings. She has found her peace, and now new life can flourish in your family line." As they prepared to leave, Esperanza presented them with a small cloth bag tied with a red ribbon. "Herbs for a healthy pregnancy," she explained. "Make tea from these when you feel anxious or unwell. And this," she handed Elena a small carved wooden figure of a woman holding a child, "for protection during birth and beyond." Elena cradled the figure in her hands, feeling its smooth surfaces worn by years of handling. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you." "Raise your son with love and wisdom," Esperanza replied. "Teach him about both sides of his heritage. Let him know that he is the bridge between worlds, the healing his family needed." The confirmation that they were expecting a son brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes. Somehow, she had known, but hearing it spoken aloud made their future feel even more real and precious. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, a stark contrast to the anxiety-ridden months of trying to conceive. Elena experienced normal morning sickness and fatigue, but these symptoms felt like badges of honor rather than discomfort. Her body was finally doing what it was meant to do. At their 20-week ultrasound, the technician confirmed what Esperanza had already told them. They were having a boy. Marcus squeezed Elena's hand as they watched their son, his tiny heart beating strongly on the monitor screen. "He is perfect," the technician said. "Everything looks exactly as it should." They chose the name Diego Rosa Martinez Williams, honoring both Elena's Mexican heritage and her grandmother's memory. The middle name Rosa had been Elena's idea, a way of acknowledging the woman whose pain had inadvertently blocked their path to parenthood, but whose spirit had ultimately blessed their journey. Elena's pregnancy became a time of healing in their marriage as well. The stress and disappointment that had created distance between them gradually dissolved, replaced by shared excitement and renewed intimacy. They took childbirth classes, read parenting books, and spent hours discussing their hopes and dreams for their son. The nursery, which had sat empty for so many years, finally fulfilled its purpose. They painted the walls a warm yellow and filled the room with carefully chosen furniture and toys. The rocking chair Elena's mother had bought them years earlier finally found its place by the window, where Elena could sit and read to her growing belly. Their friends and family were overjoyed by the pregnancy news, though some expressed surprise at the sudden change in Elena and Marcus' fortune. Elena's mother flew up from Arizona for a long visit, helping to prepare for the baby's arrival and sharing stories about Elena's own infancy. "I always knew you would be a wonderful mother," her mother said one evening as they folded tiny baby clothes. "Rosa would be so proud to see her great-grandson coming into the world." Elena smiled, thinking of the ritual in the mountain church and the sense of peace that had followed. "I think she is proud. I think she is finally at peace." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Portland in unusual snow. Elena found herself energized rather than slowed down by her pregnancy, nesting with an intensity that amazed Marcus. She organized every closet in their house, stocked the freezer with homemade meals, and read every baby care book she could find. On a snowy February evening, 3 weeks before Elena's due date, the contractions began. They started gently, like strong menstrual cramps, and Elena initially dismissed them as Braxton Hicks practice contractions. But by midnight, they were coming regularly and with increasing intensity. Marcus timed the contractions on his phone app while Elena paced their living room, using the breathing techniques they had learned in childbirth class. By 3 a.m., they were 5 minutes apart and lasting a full minute each. "Time to go to the hospital," Marcus said, though his voice remained calm despite his racing heart. The drive through the empty, snow-covered streets felt surreal. Elena gripped the door handle as contractions washed over her. But between them, she felt a deep sense of rightness. This was finally happening. Their son was finally coming home. The hospital staff was efficient and kind, settling Elena into a labor and delivery room with a view of the snow-covered city. As the hours passed and labor intensified, Elena found herself drawing strength from the memory of her journey to Santa Elena and the spiritual work that had brought them to this moment. During the most intense part of labor, when the pain threatened to overwhelm her, Elena closed her eyes and imagined Rosa, the spirit watching over them, no longer as a barrier but as a protector. She felt surrounded by the love of generations of women who had gone through this same experience, connected to an unbroken chain of mothers stretching back through time. Diego Rosa was born at 2:47 p.m. on February 15th, after 12 hours of labor. He emerged into the world with a strong cry and a full head of dark hair, his tiny fists waving as if he was eager to embrace life. "He is beautiful," the doctor said, placing the baby on Elena's chest. "Perfect in every way." Elena looked down at her son's face and felt her heart expand in ways she never could have imagined. All the years of waiting, all the pain and disappointment, all the spiritual work and healing, it had all led to this perfect moment. Marcus leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face as he touched Diego's tiny hand. Their son immediately grasped his father's finger with surprising strength, as if he had been waiting for this connection his entire brief life. "Welcome to the world, little one," Elena whispered. We've been waiting so long for you." In the days that followed, as they adjusted to life with a newborn, Elena often thought about the journey that had brought Diego into their lives. The conventional medical approach had failed them, but opening their hearts to older wisdom and different ways of understanding had shown them a path to healing. Diego was indeed a special child, just as Esperanza had predicted. He was unusually alert for a newborn, his dark eyes seeming to take in everything around him with keen intelligence. He rarely cried except when hungry or tired, as if he understood that his long-awaited arrival was a cause for celebration rather than distress. When Diego was 6 weeks old, they made one final pilgrimage to Esperanza's mountain cabin. The witch doctor emerged from her home as soon as she heard their car, her face lighting up with joy. "The bridge between worlds has arrived," she said, taking the baby in her arms with practiced ease. Diego seemed to recognize something in Esperanza, gazing up at her with calm, knowing eyes. The mountain woman held him close, whispering what sounded like blessings in a language Elena didn't recognize. "He will be a healer like his great-grandmother," Esperanza said, returning Diego to Elena's arms. "But his healing will be different. He will help others bridge the gaps between tradition and modernity, between cultures, between the seen and unseen worlds." As they drove home through the forest, Elena reflected on the truth of Esperanza's words. Diego, his very existence was proof that love could transcend boundaries, cultural, spiritual, and physical. Their family had been healed not through modern medicine but through ancient wisdom, not through fighting against their heritage but through embracing and transforming it. 6 months later, Elena was surprised to discover she was pregnant again. This time, there was no struggle, no desperate trying, no medical interventions. Their daughter, for Esperanza confirmed it would be a girl, was conceived in the natural rhythm of a body and spirit finally at peace. Isabella Carmen was born on a warm spring morning, completing their family in a way that felt both perfect and inevitable. She had Elena's brown eyes and Marcus's gentle smile, and from her first breath, she seemed to carry the same peaceful energy that had characterized Diego's arrival. Years later, as Elena watched her children play in the garden where they grew both roses and marigolds, she often thought about the interconnected nature of healing. Rosa's pain had created a barrier, but facing that pain with love and understanding had transformed it into a blessing. The woman who had once seemed like an obstacle to their happiness had become, through forgiveness and spiritual work, the guardian angel of their family. is future. Mrs. Chen, now in her 80s, still lived across the street and had become an honorary grandmother to Diego and Isabella. She often sat in Elena's garden, telling the children stories about their Mexican great-grandmother and the importance of honoring both their cultures. Your great-grandmother, Rosa, she would tell them, she loved your family so much that her love became like a river that changes its course. First it created barriers, but then it found a new way to flow, bringing life and blessings to everyone. Elena would smile when she heard these stories, grateful for the wisdom of older women who understood that healing often requires us to look beyond the visible world to the realm of spirit and connection that binds all families across time and space. Their story became a testament to the power of love to transform pain into purpose, of faith to turn obstacles into opportunities, and of the willingness to seek healing not just in the modern world but in the ancient wisdom that connects us all to the sacred mystery of life itself. And in the mountains, in a cabin surrounded by healing herbs and protective spirits, Esperanza continued her work, helping other families find their way to the children who were waiting to be born, waiting to bridge the worlds between past and future, tradition and transformation, hope and fulfillment.